Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today the tide of the war here in the Civil War is really going to change. From the South appear to be winning everything, pretty quickly it's going to start turning towards the North and everything changes. Let's go ahead and get started. We talked a good bit yesterday about the war in the East. This is really Lincoln's attempt to try to take over Richmond. Not only has that not worked, Robert E. Lee, the head general for the Confederacy, has invaded the North not once but twice. While he was turned back at both Antietam and at Gettysburg, massive losses of life on both sides. And while the South is running out of resources, there's not a lot of positives here to hang your hat on if you're the North. Well, that's going to start changing here today at the start of this lesson. Vicksburg is about to happen. So let me back up. If you remember from a couple lessons ago, there were two ways that the United States and Lincoln thought they could win this war. Well, the plan A was to take over Richmond. They thought that should be the easiest one because they can overpower the South. That doesn't turn out to be the case. They're really struggling because Robert E. Lee has the South and Richmond on lockdown, and they can't get anywhere near it. The plan B was the kind of the suicide mission, which was the Anaconda plan. General Scott came up with it. He's 74 years old. He's not actually fighting it. But the idea is if you can completely surround the South, you can strangle them like an anaconda. So the North is obviously the North. They can have that on lockdown. The two oceans, the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean here behind me, that's pretty easy to lock down because the North has a navy. England and France at this point are not going to get involved in the war. And officially they claim they never were anyway, but they would have had the South had more success at this point. So the South is holding on for dear life. The North is going to focus a lot of resources here on the Mississippi River to try to complete this Anaconda plan in order to shut down the South. So they started this at the beginning of the war. And Lincoln, he couldn't spare any of his good generals. Keep in mind, all the actual good generals had gone to the South. So anybody that had any experience, like Irwin McDowell or George McClellan, some other guys that we haven't talked about in this course, Burnside and Hooker, these guys, Lincoln needs there in Washington, D.C. to do the main thing. So he puts the rookie, the guy that wasn't even a general at the start of this war, over here in a suicide mission to try to take over the Mississippi River. That man's name is Ulyssess Grant. I'll back out of the picture here. Since the beginning of the war, while we have completely not talked about the West and the Mississippi River, Grant here has been wrecking shop, going up and down the Mississippi River, having a lot of success taking over these forts one after another. Now it has come down to the final mega fort that controls the Mississippi River called Vicksburg. So Vicksburg here on this map is the last stronghold for the Confederacy. If you can take over Vicksburg, the Anaconda plan is complete and you have the South completely surrounded. So Grant here, what he does with Vicksburg is he puts it under siege. Putting it under siege means that you are just going to surround it because he knows a full frontal invasion of Vicksburg is going to be very, very difficult. So what he's going to do is he is going to basically block off the river on the multiple sides of how supplies get into Vicksburg from the river and then surround it so no supplies can get into Vicksburg by land. He is going to slowly starve out Vicksburg, and this is what the term siege means. He has put Vicksburg under siege, and it is a waiting game. Vicksburg knows how important they are to the Confederacy. If Vicksburg loses, the writing is on the wall for the South. So they hold out as long as they can. There's some paintings of this. For the first couple months, while there was constant bombardments, means that they're firing shells into Vicksburg, the people of Vicksburg start starving to death. They eat the horses, the dogs, rats. It's awful in Vicksburg. It's absolutely awful. And Vicksburg holds out as long as they can. By the end, the North is able to roll in. They have ironclad ships. They kind of figured this out in the Civil War, ships made of metal. They start rolling them in by Vicksburg and just opening fire from the river. and Vicksburg is going to collapse and surrender. This is a massive victory for the North because this whole suicide mission of taking over the Mississippi River, they didn't think that was possible. Not only is it possible, this is a legit win, and I'm like stuttering over here to try to explain the significance of this. After Vicksburg, the North is like, oh, you mean there's a chance we could actually win this war? So not only is it militarily turned the tide of the war because the South is locked down, the entire Mississippi is under control, the North realizes they might actually win this. The South starts realizing, we are in trouble now because England and France at this point are not going to get involved. So the question here is, what was so significant about Vicksburg? How did this battle drastically help turn the tide of the war? What plan did it complete? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right. The Gettysburg Address. If you've heard of that and you can't think exactly what it is, that's the one you may not be familiar with. 7 years ago. The Gettysburg Address is probably one of the most famous speeches in American history for a variety of reasons. Not only is it eloquent, but it's a really cool story that goes along with it. So Gettysburg, the bloodiest battle in American history, took 3 days. Over 50,000 people died in that battle. It took place in Pennsylvania, in the North. On the 1-year anniversary, which is right before the election of 1864, keep in mind, Lincoln is not popular. All right, all these people have died, and they blame Lincoln for this. If Lincoln wasn't the president, all these people wouldn't have died. So he's running against George McClellan. All right, and George McClellan, the general he has fired, it looks like he can win. And if George McClellan wins, George McClellan is just going to let the South be their own country and just stop fighting. And it's like, who needs this? So Lincoln is very concerned about not winning this re-election. To the point, he has now picked a Democrat vice president to run with him, a pro-slavery Democrat named Andrew Johnson, who is going to run with Lincoln in the presidency of 1864 in order to try to get the slave states that are in the North to vote for him. This is how bad it is for Lincoln. So it's the 1-year anniversary of Gettysburg, and they are going to dedicate that battlefield as a cemetery. Now, most of the battles actually take place in the South because they've been trying to invade Richmond. So there's not a lot of places, basically Gettysburg and Antietam, that you can turn these places into cemeteries because they would be in the North. So on the 1-year anniversary, they're going to have a big shindig here at Gettysburg, and a lot of people are going to show up and they're going to speak at this, making this field into a cemetery. Lincoln 100% wants to show up and give a speech. He's the president of the United States. The people at Gettysburg that are setting this up don't want him there. And kind of think about that. People blame him for the reason these people died. Do you really want that dude showing up and speaking? So he actually has to get heavy-handed with this and says, no, I'm daggone it. I'm the president of the United States. I'm going to speak here. And they're like, oh, fine, I guess. So the situation here is, there's a guy named Edward Everett. All right, he is this fantastic speaker. Everybody loves to hear him speak. He is given 3 hours to give a speech. And they tell Lincoln, I guess you can show up, but you get 2 minutes at the end. All right, and that's it. All right, you don't get to have an hours-long speech like this Edward Everett guy. That's who people actually want to hear. But you, because nobody likes you, you get 2 minutes. Keep in mind, we're a year out from the election. All right, and it's not going well for Lincoln. So he famously is going to write this speech on a napkin. And sometimes that gets misconstrued in history as the fact that it was this famous speech he gives. He doesn't even care enough to get a piece of paper. He just writes on the napkin on the train ride there. The final speech he gives, yes, is on a napkin because he had gone through all his paper that he had brought to try to write it out and make sure it's perfect, that he ended up having to use a napkin to make sure he gets the final speech down. This is the final speech. Takes 2 minutes. This is the famous one that says 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth this continent. You can read it here. This speech is wildly important because when he comes up to speak, everybody's like, oh, here's this guy. Everybody here died because of you. Let's hear what you have to say. And he says, you know what? People fought and died for this country. There are tons of people that have died in this conflict, and it's awful. It's horrific. However, these men died for a cause, for something they believed in, something they gave their life for. If we decide to stop fighting and stop honoring the men who have already died for this, they literally died for nothing. These men gave their lives for this cause. It is our responsibility to continue this cause after them, because if they were here, they'd probably give their lives again. We owe it to the people who died to carry the thing that they died for to see it through the end. So keep in mind while Lincoln's saying this, he knows Vicksburg has already happened. If he can change the perception of Gettysburg from being this horrific event to these guys sacrificed for the greater good, it can change people's mindsets. And not only does he do that effectively in his speech, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you know what? That's a really unique, you know what? I like this Lincoln guy. Heck yeah, I'm now Team Lincoln. You know, there were a lot of people here at the Gettysburg Address that he gave this Gettysburg Address to even change their opinions. The reason this speech is so famous, and I have it right here, word for word of what he gave, there's no recordings of it, is because he only was given 2 minutes to speak, and he wrote it on the napkin. As he walks off the stage, he turns around and he hands it to a reporter. That reporter takes his speech that he gave and typed it in the newspaper, and it got spread all around the United States. Everybody read this and they're like, you know what? I see what he's getting at. All right. Because the key here, though, is the war is starting to go good, starting to go well for the South, or going well for the North. So they're like, all right, let's see this thing through. And really, because of the Gettysburg Address, everybody's like, you know what? We like this Lincoln guy. And when the 1864 election happens, the red states are the states that Lincoln wins. He wins in a landslide. So if you just look at it from an election standpoint, he won in 1860. And then 1864, he won in a landslide. He must have just been popular the whole time. He wasn't. It was the 11th hour. So Lincoln becomes remains the president. All right. Now everybody supports this war because it's going well. He has kind of a new lease on this. All right. He has the public support. And in history, we tend to sometimes think that he was popular the whole time. He wasn't. What is interesting, though, keep this in the back of your mind, he picked his vice president when he didn't know if he was going to win. So his vice president is a pro-slavery Democrat still. But hey, nothing bad can happen there as long as, nothing happens to Lincoln. Anyway, so the question here is, explain how the Gettysburg Address, given by Abraham Lincoln, helped change the mindset of the American people towards the Civil War. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. Now that Lincoln has been reelected president, he's going to turn his attention full force to this war. He has the support of the North. The South is on its last legs. He's going to put the big guns together. So Lincoln, who has struggled mightily in order to find a competent leader, now has found it kind of surprising to Lincoln in this guy Ulyssess S. Grant, who again wasn't even a general at the start of the war, had to be promoted to that, who took over Vicksburg. So it only makes a logical solution that you are going to take Ulyssess S. Grant and have him fight Lee. All right, because both of these guys are the two best. So this is the famous part of the Civil War where Grant is going to face off with Lee, which is why I talked about it multiple lessons ago. Takes a while to have got to this point. Now, Grant, if you're visually imagining, is still over at the Mississippi River with his army of 100,000 men who have been wrecking shop the whole war there at the Anaconda Plan. Lincoln needs him to come fight Lee over here in the Eastern Theater, meaning he's got to travel all across the country over the Appalachian Mountains, over here in the East to fight Lee. So when Lincoln contacts Grant, it's like, hey, I need you to come over this way. Grant's like, cool, let me get my men together. It'll be however many months before we can get there. And Lincoln says, no, we're not waiting. Just you come. I will give you a new army here, all right? And I will pick somebody else to be in charge of your men. But honestly, the Mississippi River has been secured. There's really nothing to do. So Grant, while he hates leaving his men that he's been through all these battles with, is like, sure, boss, because Lincoln's his boss. Ulysses S. Grant travels over to Washington, D.C., where he is given an army. And a lot of the guys that are in his army, in Ulysses S. Grant army, are people that have actually been in the armies of the other awful generals, people like Burnside and Hooker and these other guys that we haven't really gone into a lot of detail here. So they're like, oh, we got a new general. This guy's probably going to be trash too, because everybody that tries to defeat Lee loses horribly. All right. Now, Lincoln also has another issue here. He's got 100,000 men here in Vicksburg with nobody to lead them. So Lincoln picks a guy to go down here and babysit these guys, all right, here at Vicksburg, a guy by the name of William Tecumseh Sherman. So Sherman, if you're like, oh, that dude looks kind of crazy. Yeah, he was. Like, and I only say that slightly jokingly. He had multiple breakdowns psychologically throughout his life, like where he would like bottle and keep his own urine and stuff. And he was very aware that we're going to talk more about him here in a second. He is a very, while I can make him out really, he's a crazy, crazy man. He's not stupid, all right? Because this man is going to play a pivotal role in this war kind of unexpectedly. He gets sent down to basically babysit Grant's men. Doesn't really give him any orders. Lincoln says, go on down there. When you get there, just await some orders and I'll send them to you. But what happens is Lincoln gets really focused on what is happening here when he puts Grant against Lee, that he forgets to send William Tecumseh Sherman orders down there in Vicksburg. So this leads to a very, very, very famous battle. The Battle of the Wilderness. This is the first time Grant gets an army, goes down and fights Lee. So Lee is obviously between Richmond and Washington, D.C. because he's trying to defend Washington, D.C. So this is an area called Chancellorsville, but there's also another battle in Chancellorsville called the Battle of Chancellorsville. So in history, we call this the Battle of the Wilderness. This is the first time Grant is going to face off against Lee. The fighting in the woods, and that's where it takes place at, in the woods like this picture here, is vicious. It's insane. The fighting is so intense with so much musket fire. The woods actually catch on fire, and both sides have to step back because there's literally a forest fire in the middle of them. All of Grant's men here are like, well, here we go. Another guy's lost to Lee because you can't fight him anymore. I guess we're all going to go back home, and he'll be fired like everybody else that loses to Lee, and Lincoln gets mad at him. And Grant says, go back home? No. And Grant does something that no other general had done. Because keep in mind, Lee is trying to defend Richmond. So he has to keep himself between Richmond and Washington, D.C. So Grant, instead of going back north, he just runs further south, running past Richmond, Virginia. This forces Lee to chase him down past Richmond, Virginia, completely opening up Richmond, Virginia, undefended, to Washington, D.C. Lee's like, oh, this is... So Lee already knows he's in a bad situation. He realizes Grant is a little smarter than a lot of the other guys he's fought against. Another big thing here, everybody else that Lee has fought in the Civil War, Lee had trained them because they learned how to be a general through Lee. Grant's only looked up to Lee. Grant and Lee have never even met because Grant wasn't a general. So Lee doesn't really know how Grant thinks. So Grant actually runs south of Richmond, pulling Lee with him, really leaving Richmond undefended to Washington, D.C. And Lee is really concerned about this, and then he sees something crazy that's happening further south. He's like, holy crap, what is that? Lincoln up in Washington, D.C. looks down at the south, like, oh my gosh, what happened? They forgot to give William Tecumseh Sherman orders, and he made his own orders. But first, the question here is, why was Grant told to leave his army at Vicksburg instead of bringing it with him? And then what was General Sherman's orders? Like, what was he told to do, or basically, what did they forget to tell him to do? Pause me, answer that completely. And we're moving on. So, at the time that William Tecumseh Sherman gets put in charge of Grant's men here at Vicksburg, Grant goes over to the Eastern Theater. He's got an army. He's going to start messing with Lee, try to run further south of Richmond. Just a whole bunch of strategy stuff. And Sherman's like, what am I going to do? Lincoln kind of forgets to give him orders. So Sherman makes his own orders. And it's called his March to the Sea. So this is a picture of William Tecumseh Sherman. He does not play around. He is a very intense person. William Tecumseh Sherman just starts setting stuff on fire. He calls it his March to the Sea. All right. What Sherman is going to do is he's going to get all of Grant's men. They're going to basically get shoulder to shoulder, and they're going to march across the South, trying to get to the Atlantic Ocean in order to just destroy stuff. There's no more military really in the South, but the South still is refusing to tap out. So Sherman's like, fine, I'm just going to set all their stuff on fire. So he goes to private property and just starts annihilating anything he comes in contact with. They are not actively looking to murder people. They're letting everybody leave their property, but he is burning cotton fields, cities, towns, personal property. Anything Sherman can come to, he just sets it on fire. There's nothing the South can do. The reason the South can't do anything is because there's no army. The only army left is the little one that Lee has, and he's trying to fight Grant up here in around Richmond, and he's just wrecking shop. It's total war. Nobody has seen anything like this, because to this point, war has been confined between military units and people that were in the military that were getting killed. This is just setting private property and fields and plantations and all types of stuff on fire, basically making the South realize they can't even defend themselves. It's infuriating the South. There's nothing that they can do here. Very famously, and this is his march to the sea, he will eventually get down to Savannah. He actually gets to the ocean, and then he's going to go north. But the most important thing that he does here, the eye-awakening one, is Atlanta. When he gets to Atlanta, he could have gone around Atlanta, chooses not to, goes right to Atlanta. Because he knows Atlanta has like 20,000 troops that are inside Atlanta that Atlanta has not given to the military. Because they have their 20,000 troops in order to defend Atlanta. Sherman has about 100,000 battle-hardened people from Grant. And he lines up outside Atlanta, and he says this. He says, hey, Atlanta, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to come in there and I'm going to burn your city to the ground, and there's nothing you can do about it. I know you got 20,000 people in there that are going to fight for it. Here's your choices. Number one, they can come out here right now and they can fight. And we'll fight them right here in this field, and we're going to kill every one of them. Or when we come in there tomorrow and we find them, we're going to kill every single one of them. Or, and I suggest you do this, tonight, everybody should leave. That city better be deserted tomorrow, because anything twitching inside that city, we're going to burn it to the ground. So Atlanta's only hope of these 20,000 men they've held on to the whole time. You know what they do in the middle of the night? They leave Atlanta. They actually had a small military, and it abandons Atlanta. Sherman rolls into Atlanta the next day and burns the entire city to the ground. This is morally just destructive to the South, because the people that are supposed to be defending you, your actual soldiers, won't even go fight this man because he's so terrifying. The only way to get Sherman to stop is to surrender. That's it. Because Sherman says, I'm going to keep setting everything on fire. I'm going to burn your house down. I'm going to burn your neighbor's house down. I'm going to burn down everything I can. The only way to get me to stop is y'all got to surrender. Y'all surrender, I'll stop burning things down. But short of that, I won't. So Sherman, once he gets to through Atlanta, gets to Savannah, moves his way up into Columbia. He's moving up into North Carolina. He's into North Carolina, headed to Raleigh, when this is the same time when Grant has run further south of Richmond. Lee is chasing him, and everybody's like, holy crap, what is happening here with Sherman? Like, he's setting everything on fire, and everybody panics. And this is when Lee realizes the war is over. You can't even defend Richmond anymore. The South's getting set on fire, and Robert E. Lee realizes it's going to be time to surrender. What's really interesting about this story is Lincoln probably would have adamantly been like, this is too far, Sherman, would not have allowed Sherman to do this. But since Lincoln forgot to give him orders, Sherman just made his own orders. But knowing that if Lincoln gets a message to him and tells him to stop, he has to stop. So what Sherman does, every town he got to the entire time, he destroyed the telegraph lines first. This way, Lincoln couldn't send him a telegraph telling him to stop. But this is absolute brutal level this war went to at the end of destroying personal property in the South. Is that on top of Lee running out of troops? Lee realizes here the gig is up, and there's basically at this point there's a ceasefire in the Civil War. The question here is, describe General Sherman's reasoning for his march to the sea. Why did he do this? And what did he hope to gain from such destructive behavior? Like, how is this going to benefit the United States? So that's what I got for you guys today. Tomorrow we'll start talking about the surrender and the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. But until then, see you guys tomorrow.